Why does the United States Supreme Court have a statue of Confucius? Inside the highest courtroom in America, there is a giant stone philosopher from ancient China just standing there. And here's the funny part. He has almost nothing to do with American law. So let's rewind back to 1935, Washington, D.C. The brand new Supreme Court building has just opened. A literal marble temple of American justice. 16 legendary lawgivers pose on the front of the building. Stone faces, serious vibes only. But when you walk into the main courtroom and look up, you get hit with something way stranger. On the east wall, 3 giant figures stand in a row. First, Moses, holding the 10 Commandments like a divine stone rulebook. Second, Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, hugging a scroll like it's his college thesis. Third, Confucius. Yes, that Confucius, but originally. This lineup looked very different. The sculptor's early sketch had Napoleon standing next to Confucius, but in the final version, Napoleon got removed. Confucius survived. Why? Because the review committee said, Napoleon is a conqueror, not a lawmaker, but Confucius represents moral law. Very deep, very philosophical, very ironic. Because in 1935, the Chinese Exclusion Act still existed. Chinese immigrants had almost no rights. Now let's open the sculptor's old work diary, page 47. He writes, "Today I argued with architect Cass Gilbert about who should become statues. I insisted on Confucius. Gilbert said, the American public will not understand an Eastern figure. And the sculptor replied, exactly because they don't understand him. They need to be educated." And here's the plot twist. This sculptor was not a Chinese expert, just an Austrian-American artist with strong opinions. He believed the law should not be a Western-only playground. In his notes he wrote, Moses stands for divine law, Confucius stands for moral law, and Solon completes the philosophy. Nice theory. Except he completely misunderstood Confucius. So how did American elites in the 1930s understand Confucius? Harvard professor Roscoe Pound had an explanation. He said, Confucius teaches not specific laws, but restoring things to their proper order. He basically translated Confucianism into American legal language. Let the ruler act like a ruler, the father like a father, the son like a son. Everyone stays in their lane. Ritual becomes social order. Virtue becomes the purpose of law. But Chinese scholars would probably laugh and cry at the same time, because Confucius rarely talked about law. He talked about ritual and virtue, and his idea of protecting your family even when they commit crimes is the exact opposite of American equality before the law. Which means the Confucius in the Supreme Court is not real Confucius. He is American edition Confucius, a philosopher redesigned to fit Western imagination. So let's keep going. Fast forward to the 1930s. American legal thinking begins to shift. The old mechanical, rule-only approach to law starts to fall apart. And now, sociological law is rising. Law that actually matches real society, not just cold text on paper. To promote that new philosophy, they needed an Eastern symbol. Something wise, something exotic, something safe. And Confucius was the safest mascot they could pick. But the most dramatic twist arrived 1 month after the statue was completed. In October 1935, the Washington Post received a letter. Dear editor, it began. I am a Chinese laundry worker. Yesterday I visited the Supreme Court and saw the statue of Confucius. I felt proud. But I was also confused. Why is my ancestor honored in marble while I am not allowed to become an American citizen? The letter never made it to print. But something else did. The visitor logs of the Supreme Court. In 1936, the number of Chinese visitors jumped by about 300%. What were they coming to see? They came to see a member of their own culture standing inside the highest temple of American law. And the contrast was brutal. In the same hall where Confucius looked down from above, Chinese people still had restricted rights even to testify in court before 1943. Stone Confucius was treated like a wise ancestor. Living Chinese were treated as second-class citizens. So how did the statue make it onto that wall? It took 3 major boosters. First booster, Justice Louis Brandeis, the first Jewish justice in U.S. history. He strongly supported diverse symbols. His logic was simple. If Moses can represent the Hebrew tradition, why can't Confucius represent wisdom from the East? Second booster, architect Cass Gilbert. He originally opposed the idea, saying Americans wouldn't understand an Eastern figure. But later, he completely flipped sides. He wrote to his son, the statue of Confucius gives the building a global feel. We're not just building an American courthouse. We're building a pantheon of justice. Third booster, a scholar of Chinese philosophy. He wrote a book called Confucius, the Man and the Myth. In that book, he basically transformed Confucius into the Socrates of the East. He then made sure that book landed right inside the Supreme Court library. Those three forces together pulled off a cultural magic trick. They took an ancient Chinese philosopher and turned him into a symbol of American justice. If you visit the statue in person, you will notice 5 hidden details. First secret, the hand pose. Confucius has his right hand resting on his chest. That is not a traditional Chinese gesture, it's a Greek orator pose, a Western speech gesture placed onto an Eastern sage. Second secret, the scroll. There are tiny letters carved into the book he holds. They are not lines from the Analects. They are Latin legal maxims, another East meets West remix. Third secret, his position in the courtroom. Confucius stands on the east side, but he faces west, symbolizing Eastern wisdom shining toward the west. Fourth secret, the robe pattern. Hidden inside the folds of his robe is a tiny scale symbol, a Western sign for legal balance, but Confucius is not traditionally linked to scales in Chinese culture. Fifth secret, the base inscription. Moses' base says lawgiver. Solon's base says Greek lawgiver. Confucius's base just says Confucius, nothing else, which shows even Americans didn't quite know how to label him. These details reveal the truth. This was never a perfectly accurate tribute to Confucius. It was America imagining its own ideal version of the East. Now fast forward to 2020. After the George Floyd incident, the whole country was rethinking everything they once took for granted. People started questioning whether Confucius's emphasis on hierarchy conflicts with modern ideas of equality. Why keep him in the Supreme Court at all? But another voice grew louder, a voice saying, Confucius reminds us that law needs a moral foundation, and that foundation can come from any civilization. Then came the twist of 2021. A Chinese-American Supreme Court nominee was asked during a hearing, "What do you think of the Confucius statue in the building you hope to join?" His answer became legendary. "That statue tells me that legal wisdom has no racial boundaries." The great thinkers of the past all remind us that justice needs many sources. In that moment, the cultural appropriation of 1935 transformed into a symbol of diversity in 2021. Chinese scholars today fall into 3 camps. First camp, cultural pride. This proves Chinese culture influences the world. Even the US Supreme Court honors Confucius. Second camp, critical reflection. This is not the real Confucius. America reshaped him to fit its own needs. Third camp, pragmatic. Who cares? At least it's free international advertising. If Americans study Confucius, that's better than ignoring Chinese culture entirely. But the deepest insight comes from the late scholar Li Ziho. He said, "The Confucius in the Supreme Court is like Kung Pao chicken at McDonald's. It's not authentic anymore. But it makes more people aware that Chinese cuisine exists." Cultural transmission often begins with misunderstanding, and sometimes misunderstanding opens the door to real understanding. Confucius says, "A wise viewer clicks subscribe." Moses says, "Thou shalt not forget to like the video." Solon says, "Leave a comment or face legal consequences."